Hello students, welcome to this video tutorial on working with variables note, part B, simplifying using the distributive property. Okay, so what is the distributive property? Well, it's a rule that you're going to use a lot in grade 8. Okay, so let's break it down. Before attempting these problems, you need to know these integer rules for multiplying. Now I should say you need to remember these integer rules for multiplying. Positive times a positive equals a positive, rule 1. Positive times a negative equals a negative, rule 2. Negative times a positive equals a negative, rule 3. And rule 4, negative times a negative equals positive. So I think we discussed in class that when the signs are the same, such as rule 1, 2 positives, or rule 4, 2 negatives, the answer is always going to be a positive integer. And when the signs are different for the two integers, such as in rule 2 or in rule 3, we have a negative times a positive, then the answer is always going to be negative. So I hope you remember those rules from our integer unit. So what is the distributive property? Well, let's have a look at example 1. 3 outside of a bracket 2u minus 2 close bracket actually means the inside of the bracket added together 3 times. Okay? So that's what it means. It means whatever's in the bracket added together 3 times or multiplied by 3. There is a hidden operation here in between the 3 and the bracket. So I've already kind of said it, so it's multiplication. And I think this year you've realized that whenever I've asked a question that what is the hidden operation that's invisible, the answer is usually multiplication, isn't it? Okay, so to simplify expressions like this, we use something called the distributive property. We multiply what is outside the bracket with all of the terms inside the bracket. All right, so my sheet is color-coded, so hopefully it's a little bit easier to follow. All right, so step 1, we multiply what is outside of the bracket, 3, times the first term inside the bracket. The first term inside the bracket is 2u. So 3 times 2u. Okay? So what is 3 times 2? Well, 3 times 2 is 6. And because we've got a variable, this is 6u. 3 times 6. So we do the operation like we normally would, and then we just attach the u to it. So 3 times 2u equals 6u. Okay? Now, we take what's outside the bracket in step 2 and we multiply it to the second term. The second term is minus 2. So let's write out our step here. We multiply 3 times minus 2. Okay, so in step 1 we multiplied what's outside the bracket with the first term, and in step 2 we multiply what's outside the bracket with the second term. Alright, so remember your integer rules. What is 3 times negative 2? Well, that is negative 6. Positive integer times a negative integer equals a negative integer. Now we put these two terms together. Now remember in part A, I told you that wherever we have a variable, we put the variable first. So we start with 6u, which is positive 6u, and then we attach the negative 6. Okay? This is not how I want you to write it. I don't want you to write it this way. Okay? Algebraically, in terms of algebraic form, this is not correct. So I don't want you to write it like that. Okay, so that was an easy example to start with, but I hope it made a little bit of sense. Let's go to example 2. Let me scroll down a little bit here. Sometimes the term on the outside of the bracket appears at the end. So you see in this case, let's look at this question, example 2. We have the bracket first, x squared plus 3x minus 2, and then we close the bracket. Now, when the term outside of the bracket appears after, it's usually given a little dot here. Okay, and again, that dot means multiplication. So in this case, again, you have to focus on what's on the outside of the bracket. And we're going to multiply it with every term inside the bracket. So I've color-coded mine here. Step 1 is in blue. So we multiply -4 times, what's the first term? The first term is -2. Okay? You okay with that? The outside term is -4 times the first term inside, going kind of closest to farthest away, is -2. Well, -4 times -2 is -8. Negative times a negative is a positive 8. All right, step 2. I've color-coded it in purple here. So we multiply the outside term, which is -4, times the next term. The next term is positive 3x. Okay? So we just look at the numbers here. What is -4 times 3? -4 times 3 is, well, negative times a positive is -12, and then we just attach this x here beside it. Okay? Okay so far? All right, step 3 in this case, because there are 3 steps here, because there are 3 terms inside the bracket. We multiply the -4, we follow this green arrow, and we multiply it by the last term, which is x squared. So we have -4 times x squared. So I just want to highlight something here. You'll notice that the first thing that we're multiplying by is always the same. And it's always going to be the same because it's whatever is here on the outside of the bracket. Okay? All right. So what's -4 times x squared? Well, that's -4x squared. -4 times 1x squared is -4x squared. All right, so let's put the terms together without putting them in the proper order. So let's just list them from top to bottom. So if I were to just go from the top to the bottom, I've got positive 8, subtract 12x, subtract 4x squared. But now, let's write them in the proper order here. Okay, the proper order, remember, if we have any exponents, we write that term first. So -4x squared. Then, if we have any variables, we write that next. So this is -12x. And then finally, if we have any numbers, these are called constants, we write them last. Okay, so this expression, x squared plus 3x minus 2 in brackets times -4x, can be simplified. It actually means -4x squared minus 12x plus 8. Okay, so the examples are getting more and more complicated here. So let's go to number 3. Okay, sometimes we have to use distributive property, which is this note, and combine like terms, which was the previous note, to simplify a complicated expression. So let's look at this expression. 6 outside of a bracket 4y minus 5, close bracket, minus 2 bracket 10 plus 4y. So what I want you to do is I want you to kind of consider this 2 separate questions, where I'm drawing a dotted line down the middle. See how I've separated it here? I have basically 2 distributive property questions. Okay, so let's look at the left side or here, this part, part 1. So this is 6 with bracket 4y minus 5. Okay? All right, so step 1, we multiply what's outside to the first term here. So what's 6 times 4y? 6 times 4y is 24y. And it's positive, isn't it? Okay. All right, step 2. I multiply what's on the outside with the second term. So the second term is negative 5. What's 6 times negative 5? Now remember, this negative is attached to the 5. What's 6 times negative 5? Well, positive times a negative is negative, and 6 times 5 is 30. So for this part, we ended up with 24y minus 30. Okay, so let's leave that part for now. And let's work on the second half of the question. So the second half of the question starts with negative 2 outside the bracket. And then we have 10 plus 4y. So let's set it up the exact same way. I'm going to use the same color coding. All right, so step 1, we multiply what's on the outside to the first term. So negative 2 times 10. Negative 2 times 10 is negative 20. Okay, that's the first step. Now let's multiply what's on the outside with the next term, which is positive 4y. So what's negative 2 times positive 4y? Well, let's just look at the numbers first. Negative 2 times positive 4. Negative times a positive is going to be negative. Negative 2 times 4 is 8. And then we'll just put the y here. Okay? All right. So now, let's combine everything that we have. So we have positive 24y. Actually, let's do that below here. I apologize. It says here, I've got a little clue here. Then combine the terms of the two parts of the solution. Sorry about that. So we have positive 24y minus 30. Okay, that's this part right here. Okay, and then we have minus 20 minus 8y. That's this part right here. Okay, so we combine the two parts of our solution. Now, if you remember from our note in part A, let's identify the common or like terms. So we have a positive 24y, and then we have a subtract 8y. So what is 24 subtract 8? Hopefully you said 16y. And this is positive. Okay? Now, let's look at our numbers. Our numbers, we have negative 30 subtract 20. What is negative 30 subtract 20? Well, that is negative 50. Okay? So our last step is we combine these terms together. We always put the variable first. So the variable is 16y. Don't write positive here because that's where we drop it. And then we have minus 50. So have a look at this expression. Isn't it a whole lot simpler than this expression up here? It's hard to believe that this expression is actually really this expression in its simplest form. So let me just write a little note here. Much simpler expression. Okay, so I hope you're able to follow along. We're getting into some really exciting grade 7 stuff that's going to carry over into grade 8. So thanks for watching. Please call Mr. Ueda over and show him your completed note, and he'll give you some worksheets to work on. Thanks a lot. Bye.